TuBishvat Sameach. Happy New Year for the trees, and greetings from Lair House in Somerville, Massachusetts, opening next month on Purim. And special thanks to our friends at Congregation Darchei Noam in New York for inviting me to share these words of Torah this past Shabbat. So the Kabbalistic TuBishvat Seder is a very special Jewish ritual. It's a midwinter invitation to slow down, to cultivate mindfulness and connection. Together we open four doorways into four worlds. We meditatively drink wine and eat tree fruits as we journey through the worlds of action, emotion, mind, and spirit. We do all this to bring ourselves into resonance with trees, not just the earthly variety, but the greater tree, the tree of life, Eitz Chaim. And never have we needed this spiritual technology more than now, as we face such an overwhelming climate crisis on every level: physical, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual. But of course, the metaphor can be a problem too. Maybe we can get carried away with the symbolism and forget about the first principles of TuBishvat. Because brace yourselves, it could be that TuBishvat didn't originate as an eco-Jewish climate action, mystical environmentalist holiday. So I thought we might revisit the origins. There's an argument in the Talmud Yerushalmi where there's a discussion and a thought, a proposal, an understanding that by this day on the Jewish calendar, all the rains have fallen in the land of Israel, so that the fruits begin to emerge after this date. And there's another opinion that so that while all the fruits that grew until this day are mainly the product of the prior year, all the fruits that emerge from this day forward are for the year to come. And so this date determines which year the fruit harvest belongs to. Therefore, TuBishvat is based on our understanding of when the rains come and the predictability of when the rains come, so that climate change and its impact on Israel and the Middle East, which is already happening and projected to worsen over time, actually throws into doubt our ability to even understand TuBishvat as the day it's supposed to be. What happens if the rains change their timing? Do we need to change the date? How would we know when to change it to? So while the TuBishvat Seder offers a beautiful spiritual paradigm, it's also important to remember the day's foundation. It's about accountability. It's about well-being. It's about food and food justice. And food justice means a lot of things these days, as does climate justice. What does it mean wherever you are, where you're seeing this, watching this from? What does it mean to look at the climate disasters that have happened in your community? And who's been impacted most? Those most vulnerable populations, low-income communities. We think about justice as the precursor, the prerequisite, maybe the dawn of a bigger idea, the dawn of redemption. And that idea comes alive in the parsha we just read, the Shalach, and the story of Shirat Hayam, the Song of the Sea, which is really not just the centerpiece of that parsha, but arguably the poetic cornerstone of the entire Exodus narrative. What happened there in that moment? Can you imagine? When our people were truly free, they had just come through the splitting of the Red Sea and were freed from their oppressors, the Egyptians, after so many hundreds of years. What was that like? I imagine a sense of shock mixed with jubilation and redemption. A sense that anything is possible. Miracle. And I bet a lot of us could tell stories when we felt impacted by something miraculous. So here's my story. I remember my father telling me as a very young child, I was probably 5, that almost all of his parents' families, our ancestors, were murdered in the Holocaust. My legal name is Jeremy K. Manella, but my Hebrew name is Yakir, named after my great-grandfather, Yakir Kumpel. Yakir was a Kohen, he was a shopkeeper, he was a leader, and he died in the gas chambers of Brooklyn. And his daughter, my grandma, Lanya, my grandparents, Saul and Lanya, somehow survived and found each other in a DP camp after the war. And with the help of the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, they came to America, first arriving at Ellis Island, and then were welcomed by the Pittsburgh Jewish community, where they began a new life. I think about what they went through, what they did for my dad and my mom did for me, and the blessings that I tried to pass on to them in that way. To our 4 boys growing up in the farmland and hills outside of Baltimore near Pearlstone, immersed in Shabbat, holidays. And it all seems pretty miraculous. And I draw strength and hope and faith from that ancestry. But I never realized how much that experience informed and influenced who I am and how I do this work until about a decade ago, when I invited a good friend of mine, Seth Seamus, to speak at an event aimed at empowering Jewish community members to lead sustainability initiatives at synagogues, JCCs, and other Jewish organizations. Seth and I are fellow Teva and Adama alum. We became close during our days together on the holy grounds of the Isabella Freeman Jewish Retreat Center, really the birthplace of this movement, the birthplace of many other things. And Seth then went on to become a global leader in agroecology. He now works for an amazing international NGO called Eco-Agriculture Partners, focused on sustainable development, which gives him the opportunity to travel and attend the UN climate and biodiversity conferences every year. And at that event many years ago, Seth said something which shook me to my core, which I have remembered ever since. Somebody had asked, so what's the unique Jewish contribution to the fight against climate change? And I was sitting in the audience thinking, oh, that's a great question. Seth, tell them about Shemitah. Tell them about TuBishvat. Tell them about Ta'anit, how we fast when there's no rains. About how all the holidays are based on the agricultural cycles and the prayers are based on the daily cycles of nature. All of which would have been fine, but Seth said something different. He said, well, you know, Jewish history has taught us how to live through trauma and how to find hope and meaning, even in the darkest hours. The world's going to need that capacity now and for years to come. And dead silence filled that room. He was right. And that resilience goes all the way back to our years of slavery in Egypt, which somehow we survived and then one day found ourselves freed on the shores of the Red Sea. Sometimes it feels to me, and I think to many of us, teenagers and college students and young adults, people of all ages, it feels like we're holding up a really heavy burden, almost impossible. Sometimes it feels hopeless. We wonder if it's an inevitable climate collapse that's coming at us, and that we're fighting against several hundred years of exponential environmental destruction catalyzed since the Industrial Revolution, and at least 100 years ahead of us before any potential light at the end of the tunnel. And yet, the Israelites called out and their voices were heard. And one day, they found themselves freed on the shores of the Red Sea. So to read this parsha, this story of the Song of the Red Sea, the Song of the Sea, and to try on to imagine feeling that sense of emotional exuberance, freedom, and redemption, I think is profoundly deep medicine for all of us who are so profoundly impacted, especially young people, by climate change anxiety and grief. Because it's an image of the seemingly impossible, the miraculous, the hope it almost hurts to feel. That someday humanity will be free from this nightmare. Someday, please God, there will come a time, if we all help make it so, when our descendants will be able to shout and dance and sing with gratitude. Not because we've brought Mashiach, the Messiah, although that'd be great, but because we've finally found our way free from this all-encompassing crisis and this heavy burden. And we know great progress is possible. Cities have cleaned up their polluted rivers, countries have collaborated to repair the ozone, we've been able to reduce smog, invent new clean energy sources, we've even rewilded natural spaces all over the world. Did you know American bald eagles were once heavily endangered and are now really common all over the country? Did you know the New York Times Magazine put out a piece in late October that both celebrated the dramatic improvement in the last decade of the outlook on climate, but still acknowledged the radical changes that are coming to all of us in a life after climate change? All of these challenges and solutions pale in comparison to what we now face. But as we'll read next month in the book of Esther, Mordecai says to her, "Who knows? Perhaps you were chosen for just such a time as this." And as Chaim Weizmann, the first president of Israel, said, "Miracles sometimes occur, but one has to work terribly hard for them." When the Israelites come out of the Red Sea and the Egyptians drowned, they knew there was no going back. And I think that's true for us as well. And as my friend and teacher, Jim Farley of the Leashtag Foundation out in San Diego, teaches me, we must see ourselves as if we are like the Israelites in this parsha, not in the sense that we're redeemed, but in the sense that we must accept that we have many years and decades of wandering ahead of us, journeying through the unknown, uncertain wilderness of climate upheaval as this century unfolds. And the question for us is, will that journey in the years ahead be an experience of exile or of redemption? My rabbi and teacher and Chazon's new director of Jewish learning, Rabbi Petachia Lichtenstein, taught me that exile, the word is galut, also is the word golah, gimel vav lamed he. And that word is just one aleph short of the Hebrew word for redemption, geulah. So what is the difference between exile and redemption? How do we transform an experience of feeling abandoned or hopeless to a redeemed experience of shleimut, wholeness, and justice? It's the aleph, the sense of spirit, of unity, of oneness. Redemption may be the opposite of exile, but if we bring that spirit and that unity and that oneness, we can make it part of the rhythm of life. Feel the oneness immanent in the interconnectedness of ecology, and experience the dynamism that makes life worth living. It's fully within our power to navigate the years ahead, albeit through a period of great climate crisis and tumult, as an era headed towards redemption rather than exile. And to do that, we must summon the full capacity of the Jewish people, our brilliance and creativity, our iconoclasm and rebelliousness, our power and strategic influence, our wealth, our might, our heart and our soul, our love, our Torah, our resilience. We need all of it, and we need all of us. Jewish peoplehood and planethood, ke'ish echad belev echad, like one person with one heart. And that doesn't mean we're all going to take the same path to get there. The Midrash on this parsha teaches us that the Israelites passed through the splitting of the sea, not in one giant highway, but in 12 distinct paths, one for each tribe, and not all on paths that were the same length or shape, but in concentric semicircles. Picture like a rainbow with 12 stripes, one for each tribe, meaning that some traveled a shorter and more direct route to get there, and some took a lot longer to get there. That sounds pretty resonant right now to describe where we're at as a society. People have very different approaches to this moment and this crisis. So we need a big tent to invite everyone into the journey so that we can move forward together. That's why we've launched the Jewish Climate Leadership Coalition, mobilizing Jewish organizations everywhere to craft their own climate action plans and release them to the public, and of course, implement them. That's why we have some of the largest and most influential organizations in Jewish life signed on and working with us to mobilize their massive networks. So far, we've engaged almost 170 organizations, well on our way to our goal of 500 or even 1,000 organizations engaged in climate action over the course of the Shemitah cycle, representing an unprecedented environmental mobilization across the Jewish world. That's why the Jewish Youth Climate Movement is growing in leaps and bounds, now with over 50 chapters nationwide engaging teens in Jewish environmental education, community building, and climate action. And that's why those empowered teens are now graduating high school, going to campus, and starting a network of campus initiatives nationwide in deep partnership with Hillels. That's why we took 10 of those campus leaders to Israel to meet their peer climate activists. And then we went back to Egypt. This is a few years after the Song of the Sea, for COP27, the United Nations Climate Conference. And that's why we're going to bring another group of leaders to COP28 this year in the United Arab Emirates. When I was in Egypt for COP27, I traveled to Mount Sinai with my predecessor, teacher and mentor, Nigel Savage, and several other amazing Jewish environmental leaders. We woke in the middle of the night, we hiked all night up the mountain, and arrived just before dawn at the summit, where we met religious pilgrims from all over the world. Many were there for COP27, seeking spiritual sustenance amidst the unending fight against climate change. And I'll never forget Flora Vano, who I met on our walk down the mountain. Flora is a community leader, a social worker, and a COP27 delegate from Vanuatu, a small Pacific island nation existentially threatened by rising sea levels and climate disasters. Flora and her community experience climate trauma every day, every week, every month, every year. And she also was proud to share with me that despite that, all the trauma and disasters they lived through, studies show they're also one of the happiest nations on earth. We filmed her recording a climate testimony, which we shared in an email after COP27 with all of you. And then after she had poured her heart out, this woman from across the world who I had just met stood up and leaned into my arms and just started weeping. And I started crying too. And then we took a deep breath and we walked down the mountain together. We talked about our kids, our communities, our ancestral traumas and our current traumas, our hopes for the future, and how we might collaborate to get there together someday. And I wondered that day what it might look like for Jewish communities to step into relationship with communities like Flora's. What would it mean to partner with them, to support them, to see them and witness them as they navigate the threat of climate exile? What does it mean to mobilize the Jewish community and the Jewish spirit at this crossroads in history? Because this is about moving forward together. This is about redemption for people and planet. Adam and Adama. This TuBishvat, our staff and volunteers, teens and campus leaders are activating dozens of TuBishvat Seders and events all across the country. Last night, we led a Seder at Harvard Hillel. Today, we're here and excited to be at Brown Hillel tomorrow in Providence. Wherever you are, may we pray together that this TuBishvat becomes a time of healing, of coming together, of humility, and of redemption, so that we see ourselves not simply as masters or stewards of creation, but that we know ourselves to be the youngest siblings of all the rocks, all the plants, and all the animals, so that we look up to and learn from them, that we look up to and learn from the trees, not as our objects, but as our elders. And in that spirit, may we find the path to redemption. TuBishvat Sameach, everyone. Happy New Year.